We are doing week 13. You can print this out at www.hilarioushomeschooling.com. We are halfway. This will be our halfway point of our 6-month countdown, ready to homeschool. So I'm proud of you. There's a lot of work involved. It's laying a very firm foundation for moving forward and being successful with homeschooling your kids. So good job. Today we're going to be talking about recruiting a support team. And the reason that this is important is because you are probably going to get tired at some point in the homeschooling journey. And it's not necessarily that you have to have this planned out ahead of time, because God will provide for your needs. In fact, even if you never found a support team, God would be all that you need. You can depend on Him. You can rely on Him. God has taught me some of His most important lessons about faithfulness when I didn't have a whole lot of support that I could count on minute by minute. I'm not saying that my husband was not supportive, because he was, but sometimes when you're alone in the house with 6 kids, you don't know how you're going to get through the next 20, 30 minutes, okay? I've been there. So what you need is you need some people in your corner that you can count on to be cheerleaders, to just understand that you are fighting a battle, because it is a spiritual battle. If God has called you to raise your children, the enemy, Satan, is going to do everything he can to frustrate that plan. And so expecting some opposition, expecting the exhaustion, it gets discouraging. So you want to make sure that you've got some plans in place, thinking through it, nothing concrete, just some ideas, okay? Let me read you the Bible verse that I have picked out for today. This is out of Exodus 17, and they are fighting the Amalekites. Joshua is actually on the field fighting, but the leadership, Moses, Aaron, and Hur, are at the top of a hill. This is verse 11, as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. This is just an example of what happens when you have somebody as powerful as Moses, as strong as Moses, and as reliable as Moses, but he still got tired. And so he had people already appointed. Joshua and Hur were already there with him on the hilltop, ready to hold up his arms. There will be times where you will be alone, and it will feel impossible to get through what you need to get through. And yet God is always with you. So remember that. But also start to recruit a support team so that those days don't have to be as hard when you're facing them alone. Homeschooling isn't necessarily difficult. It's very time intensive. It's got a lot of moving parts. So even though homeschooling itself can be done by many, many, many people, you don't need special qualifications to do it. You do want to think through your plans and your ideas and have things in place. So with all of that said, here are some things a support team can do for you. And I'm not talking that you need to have regular, oh, I need Rachel's support team to meet on Monday nights. You don't need to be egocentric about it. But just these are what people can do if they are part of your informal support team. You can bounce ideas off of them. They can help you analyze your blind spots. They can give you a break now and then. That is very nice, but it's not essential. They can actually take over teaching a subject. They can pray for you and your family, and they can hold you accountable if you give them permission to ask, hey, how's that history lesson going? I know you were going to work on World War II. So depending on what you need from different people, these are different ways that people can help you. So who are some people that you could possibly ask to be on your informal support team? Definitely your spouse. In fact, if your spouse does not agree that you should be homeschooling, you probably have some other things that you need to work through before you start homeschooling. It's very important that both you and your spouse are on the same page about this important decision, or you are going to have a lot of frustration. If your parents are supportive, or if you have an aunt or a grandmother or grandfather who is supportive and thinks this is a great idea, then ask them to be part of your informal support team and go to them for advice. If there are other homeschooling parents in your neighborhood that you know are going to be homeschooling with a similar philosophy as you, that's a good fit. Other homeschooling parents who are not homeschooling with your same philosophy would probably still be helpful, but you need to not expect them to understand. If you have chosen like a very formal teaching philosophy and they are more like unschoolers or vice versa, there may be some times where you end up facing some criticism that you didn't expect, just because they've already chosen their best way to homeschool and they're questioning you on why you chose a different way than they did. So I'm not saying don't talk to other homeschooling parents. I'm just saying be aware of all the differences that there are in homeschooling, and don't just assume that if you found another homeschooling parent, you found somebody who's going to support you. Oftentimes you do have a lot in common, but just I wouldn't necessarily say that you can automatically just jump in and say, oh, we're best friends now. You might have some close friends, whether they have kids or don't have kids, who understand that you are looking into different educational options. You want to talk to friends who are not judgmental. If you have a friend who's always judging everything, your cooking, your outfits, where you went on vacation, if you have a friend who's judgmental about everything, they might not be a good fit for your support team, because there are times where you're going to feel very discouraged. And if they are starting to be judgmental about something you've chosen to do for homeschooling, it's not going to help you. It's going to make you feel even worse. So think about close friends who do understand and are not judgmental. Facebook friends. Okay, I mentioned this simply because I am an older person who has a Facebook account. You don't have to have Facebook, okay? I'm simply saying that there are other long distance possibilities. If you are in a community where you feel isolated as a homeschooling family, you can find somebody online, and it doesn't have to be Facebook. I mean, there's a lot of other social media type groups or even email lists or things like that that are ways to connect people that live further away but have a lot in common. So just think about some online groups that you might be able to go on, and you don't necessarily need to jump in with both feet. You can just kind of watch for a little bit, stalk them and see if that's a group that you feel comfortable in or not. Former teachers or tutors that live in your community. We are fortunate that we still live in a very small community where I went to school, and several of my high school teachers and middle school teachers still live in the area and are retired. And so they have been a fabulous way for me to bounce ideas off of and get encouragement from them, because they're already passionate about education, and they aren't necessarily for or against homeschool, but they're for me, and I appreciate that about them. So it's really fun to talk to them and talk about some of my ideas about education with them. If you have musicians that live in your neighborhood, or artists, or maybe sports coaches, those can all be people who are supportive of what you're doing with your family, and maybe people that would be willing to support or get involved in something that you've got going on. And then a local homeschool group. You don't necessarily have to be part of one from far away or local, but if there is a local homeschool group that meets nearby on a regular basis, like once a month or so, you might look into attending one of their group meetings and seeing what it's like. Some of them are a lot of fun to go to, and they have speakers and they have snacks and they have curriculum exchanges and things like that. And you might really feel welcome and that you want to go back. Some homeschool groups are more like the, friends who are a little bit judgmental and kind of cliquey, where, if you're already in the group, great, but they're not really sure they want outsiders. So I'm not promising that every local homeschool group is going to be friendly, but you should at least look and see what's available and find out if you know somebody who's already going to that group and can give you more information about it. Because if you can find a great homeschool group, you are going to make new friends. Your kids are going to make new friends, and you are going to feel uplifted and encouraged anytime that you can get to one of their meetings. So don't count it out. Now, you know that you need a support group. You have some potential people in mind. What do you say? That's the next part here. Well, you just talk to them. You just say, I'm thinking about homeschooling, and I noticed you. Okay, well, you have to fill in the blank part here because I don't know your situation. But okay, so let's say that I have my former science teacher who lives in the same community. And I say, hey, I'm going to be homeschooling biology this year. And I remember the days that you taught us dissection. And it would be really neat if my kids were able to experience dissection with you. Would you have any time, maybe in the spring, where you could do a series of dissections with my kids? And just think about what the going rate for your time would be so I can reimburse you for that. Okay, so I have approached somebody and explained my need. I have identified why I think that they would be a good resource for this situation. I have politely asked directly what I need. I didn't hint around, or say, ask 15 million questions hoping that they would kind of intuitively guess what I wanted them to do. I just directly asked, and I offered to reimburse them for their time. Now, you might not be in a situation where you can do that. What could you offer? If they are going to do this for you and your family, what could you offer to do in exchange? Like, I'll mow your lawn for the next 3 weeks, or I can bring you apple pie for the next 6 months, whatever. I mean, you think about what you have to offer and how you could pay somebody back. There are some situations where you can't pay somebody back. My mom has stepped in to help us so many times. She doesn't want money. We have a great relationship. She just wants to be part of our family. She wants us to still love her, which, I mean, we would anyways, right? So there's just times where you need to look at the situation, the dynamic that you already have with this person. And is reimbursement necessary? Not all the time, no. But if it's a person who would expect some remuneration for their time and expertise, then think about what you have to offer for that. If it's a close friend in church that you would like to ask to pray for you or hold you accountable, what exactly does that look like? And you don't have to decide all this from the beginning. It can develop, it can morph into something that you never even dreamed of. But probably you need to take the first step, and you need to initiate the conversation and say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I could use. Are you interested in being helpful? And some people are and some people aren't, and not to take it personally. You can say, there's the direct question. Would you either meet with me? Would you watch my kids? Would you teach this subject? Would you pray for me? Just come right out and directly ask what you're thinking. And then you can ask them just to think about it. You don't have to have an answer on the spot. There's very few things happening that are that immediate and needing emergency attention in your family, unless there's an emergency where you need somebody to watch your kids, and then that's not even a homeschool issue anymore. But don't put any pressure on the person. You are simply asking politely for them to be engaged in a part of your support team and part of your life. So make sure you follow up with the people that you ask. Don't just let this drop off of a bridge. If they're open to your ideas, just work on some details and do a trial run. You don't have to plan out the next 2 years of your lives to make this work. You can simply say, well, let's try this and see how it goes. And honestly, most people are willing to try something once or twice. If it's not for them, they'll say so. But just make sure that your relationship isn't harmed by expectations that you're putting on somebody that are unrealistic or that they don't really have any interest in pursuing. And remember, it's not a failure if something didn't work out. Just because you thought of something and you tried it and it wasn't exactly what either one of you had in mind, that's not a failure. There's still a person that you have forged a relationship with and that you have had a connection with, and they understand you a little better and you understand them a little better. It doesn't have to be awkward. You can still get along with each other. So the keys here are to just watch for opportunities. You might not even know what God is going to do for you. If you have a need in your homeschool situation, pray specifically and ask God for what you need specifically. There are so many times that God has answered my prayers when I have been very specific about what I wanted. And even to the point of being almost embarrassingly gracious. I don't deserve God to treat me like that. He doesn't owe me anything. And yet he wants to provide for his children. So when we ask patiently, politely, expressing our dependence upon him, There are more times than not that you are going to be shocked at what he provides for you. If you are putting yourself in situations where you can meet other people who feel like you do about education, that's great. One thing to remember here is that if you're putting your child in a situation with somebody like, the science teacher who did dissections for us, pay attention to your child's response. My kids absolutely loved their visits with my science teacher and had a great time dissecting animals. I mean, as much fun as you can have dissecting animals. Dead animals. They were dead. But if your child is really feeling awkward, and this, maybe the dynamic that you have with this person is fantastic, but your child just is not hitting it off in the way that you thought they would, then you can bow out graciously. Your kid does not need to go through an awkward, tense situation every, week or two just because you set this up. If it's not working, it's okay. But the reason you're homeschooling is so that you can be the main source of influence in your child's life. And if there's a person that you've pulled into your support group that just isn't really meshing with one of your kids for whatever reason, it is okay to take them back out or step back with that relationship. If you've paid for a certain number of sessions or whatever, but you finish it out. If your child promised that they wanted to learn the violin and you set up violin lessons for 2 months, finish out those 2 months. That's fine. I mean, that's, teaching lessons about not quitting and things like that and fulfilling your end of a requirement or a commitment. But really pay attention to your child and what are the reasons that they want to quit. If it's a personal issue and they just really don't feel comfortable with that person, maybe you will just decide to lose out on your money and not finish those last few sessions. I'm just saying, in today's society, you need to be very careful who you put your child with and why and for how long. And those are the kinds of things that as parents, we need to take very seriously. All right. I really want you to value the people who are around you. Maybe you can serve as a support team for another mom. If you're further down the road in your child rearing than she is, she might be looking for somebody on her support team. Don't just selfishly think about what you need. Look for other people who might be able to benefit from what you have to offer as well. Next week, we're going to be discussing Wisdom's Way of Learning by Marilyn Houshall. It is actually 4 short ebooks that you can download. And I've put the link that you can use for ordering it at the bottom of the page. So hopefully you can get a hold of that and read it. It's pretty meaty. There's quite a bit of content in it. So highlight, take notes, whatever you need to do. And we'll see you next week. Thanks.